Please continue with your story.
So Madeline said I should face the back, and so nobody will know who it is. It's just a blonde lady sitting there. And I said, perfect, no problem. You got it. And so she came and sat in the set, and then every break we took, she just stayed there and with the back and so forth. And after the run through before the dress rehearsal, I came down and I would have my notes on the previous run through, and go around to the various actors. And while I noticed something out of my eye, the corner of my eye, and it was the sponsor guy coming down, and he was easing toward the set, looking into getting around so he could see back at this blonde lady who was sitting there. And so I said, oh, what's going on here? And so he come over and he tapped me on the shoulder. And he said, can you come over here a bit? And he said, is that Madeline Sherwood back there? And I said, what's it to you? Well, it's got nothing to do with anything. And he said, yes, it does. He said, if that's Madeline Sherwood back there, get rid of her. I said, come on, for God's sake. Your back is to the camera. Nobody in this world will know that that's Madeline Sherwood. Nobody, okay? Give her a break. And he said, Dan, get her out of there. And the implied threat being, if you don't, it'll be you that'll be gone. Anyway, there were lots of stories of that nature.
And you mentioned just during the break there about Walter Bernstein.
Walter Bernstein. At one point, David Susskind gave me a screenplay, which I liked very much. I thought was not a screenplay; it was a television movie. But I liked very much, and that was going to be done in the fall, and but this was now July, and so he said, you know, when you get back from your vacation, we'll go into this. So it was, I'm trying to remember what the title of the piece was, but the author was Leslie Slote, S-L-O-T-E. And so I went out to Fire Island with my wife and little boy at the time, and he was born in '51, so he was right there in the middle of the blacklist. And a friend of mine was there and said, you know, what are you doing next? And I said, oh, script, David Susskind, guy by the name of Leslie Slote, and so. He said, Leslie? He said, I know Leslie. He's about 3 houses down here. I'll get you an introduction. Do you know him? You know, I said, no, I'd never met the guy. So he said, I'll get you guys together. And so I said, Leslie, when I meet him, I said, this is wonderful. You know, I had some notes, thoughts about the script. And he said, oh, well, no problem. I'd love to talk to you about him. Now, I was there for about 14 days. I never saw Leslie Slote again, except his back. He would hurry away from me. He was like Ensign Pulver he just would disappear. And at the end of it, I was really put out. I said, this guy really doesn't want to address anything. So when I came back, went to see David Susskind. And I said, David, what's with this guy? I said, he really gave me the runaround. He said, what are you doing for dinner tonight? I said, nothing. He said, call home and tell him you're going to have dinner with me. So I went up that evening to David's apartment, and there's Walter Bernstein sitting there. I said, Walter, hi, what are you doing here? And he said, I'm the real Leslie Slote. Oh, Leslie Slote was really a person, but he worked in the mayor's office or something downtown and was doing that. He was the front. He was the And indeed, later, Walter wrote the Woody Allen script and called The Front, and that character, the Woody Allen character, was, I guess he was the front. He was the Leslie Sloat, and Walter was the other guy.
The writer, right?
The writer, yeah.
Wow. There was a reference that we found in a book somewhere about a phone call that you received late at night.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Oh, we were in bed, and the phone rang, and I said hello, concerned that, at 1 o'clock in the morning. He said, "Is this Daniel Petrie?" And I said, "Yes, it is. Who's this?" He said, "It's just Daniel Petrie, who directs television things." And I said, "Yes, it is." I said, "So," said, "Mr. Petrie, I want to warn you about something." He said, "Be careful what your wife says at cocktail parties about the blacklist." Click. And so it was on notice. Dorothea had been saying how terrible things were and that it was unjust and so forth, which I certainly echoed, but somehow they had picked up and it became more sort of insinuating when it was, "But your wife says."
It's pretty scary.
Yeah, it was scary.
Probably didn't get much sleep that night.
No, not at all. No, it's very scary.
Yeah. Well, there are certainly negatives about that decade, but also a lot of positives.
Yeah, yes.
You were going to say something?
Well, I was going to say that we operated on Treasury Men in Action. I went 1 year casting and then they would clear people. The second year I was invited in to see the executive producer, and he said, "What we're doing this year, it's too costly. Each time you had to pay $25 or whatever to clear a person." And so CBS had to pay that money out, so that by the time you'd clear about 15 people, that was a large amount of money. So what they did was they did a white list of people who were Simon Pure, and you knew that any one of them you could just take, so oh man, that's so limiting. And I looked right on the page, and it says Herbert Rogers. And I said, "That's wrong. It's Rogers Herbert is the guy who worked for me last year," and so on. It took the year to get Herbert Rogers cleared because they were so scared. They wouldn't do it.
So you could only cast from the white list?
Only cast from the white list. And they were all the right-wing faction of SAG or whatever the acting body was at that time. Steve Hill,
Stephen Hill?
Stephen Hill?
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Hill had done a couple of jobs for me the previous year. Now he was not on this list. And the list was made up of the previous year. So anybody that I recognized had been dropped off it, I knew why. And so I went to the producer and I said, "Look, Stephen Hill is a rabbi. I mean, he's a very religious man. He hasn't got a bomb in his pocket. Remember the Actors Studio, that should not be something that cuts him out of a livelihood." So he said, "Oh, okay, I'll work on it, Dan." And so 6 weeks go by. And I go into the guy again, and I said, "Come on, I mean, you're not moving. Steve, you got to get him cleared." I mean, anyway, another 6 weeks go by, and I go in again, and he said, "Dan, forget it. I'm warning you, forget it." Steve Hill was not reinstated.
It took a long time for him to come back to acting, I believe.
You bet it did.
Yeah. Let's move forward, if we could, and talk about some of the other shows that you did.
Sure.
Well, someone dropped some papers in the background. Don't mind. One of the things that one of the shows that you did was a show called Excursion.
Right.
That is built as a documentary series, but it was a live documentary series. Is that correct?
Live, yes.
What was the format? How would you describe that?
There was a sort of Burgess Meredith was a sort of interlocutor who told the story, and then you would. I remember Dr. Seuss was one of the subjects, and he came on and he read one of his stories and then talked about how he created, and things like that. It was geared toward high school audience, a young people's audience. They used to call it the junior omnibus because it was the Ford Foundation sponsored omnibus, and also the little thing that we did. Excursion.
Mm-hmm. Great. And you also did Omnibus.
Omnibus. I did only one show for Omnibus, but it was a wonderful one with Kim Stanley and John Cassavetes.
Huge stars at the time.
She was. This was his first.
Oh, okay.
He broke out big because of this.
What was the name of the episode? Do you remember?
It was called Paso Doble, and it was written by Bud Schulberg, very fine writer, novelist, and so on. It was a great working experience. And Kim, of course, was a force of nature, and it's tragedy that her career, has gone a-borning the way it has, because she was really destined, we all thought in New York at that time, that Academy Awards and all of that would be coming her way. But she...
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
What was the format of Omnibus?
Well, in the case of those were usually stories written by prestigious writers, very serious subjects, an intellectual size that was not just strictly entertainment kind of thing. It might have some political overtones or whatever, but so it was a fine show, and by the way, it was a good place to hire some blacklisted writers, because the Ford Foundation didn't go by that. And they were not intimidated.
I hadn't heard that. It's terrific.
Yeah.
And Alistair Cook was the host of Omnibus?
Alistair was the host of Omnibus.
Any dealings with Alistair Cook?
Not really. Just
anything stand out as far as directing that episode?
The only thing was John Cassavetes had Paso Doble was about a bullfighter in Mexico and a tourist, a gringo tourist, and that became Kim Stanley on her honeymoon with her new husband, and she falls in love. She gets in the spell of the bullfight and all of the blood and so forth, and becomes fascinated by this intense young man. In those days, actors of a Spanish descent, Puerto Rican, whatever, were not very plentiful in New York. And I saw a lot of them, but I needed the bullfighter look and so forth. One of the people who was in the casting department at Omnibus said, it's just too bad that we can't use John Cassavetes. And I said, who? And he said, John Cassavetes. I think he'd be perfect for this. I said, well, why don't we get him? He said, oh, no. He said, he had a small part last week, and that was directed by Burgess Meredith, and by the third day, Burgess fired him. So you can't use him, you know. I said, well, I'd like to meet him. He said, anyway, he said, oh, God, he said, it's my job. Don't tell anybody I said anything about this. I said, no, I'll keep your, and it looked like it just came from some other source. So I called John Cassavetes, and we brought him over, and he read for me, and I said, great, you know, that intense look that he had, and swarthied him up a little bit makeup-wise. And and we hired him, and then Bob Sadek, who, if he sees this, he will kill me, was furious. He came to me and he said, why did you hire that ingrate for? He said, he's terrible. Buzz fired him after 3 days. And I said, but I think it's a different situation. I think he's challenged by this role, and he will do it. And of course he did. He was marvelous in the role. The next day he was off to Hollywood to test for some major motion picture.
Was it difficult to find actor or actresses to fill a multi-ethnic role at that time? I mean, was there a lot of selection? There wasn't much of a selection.
Not much of a selection. I remember, you know, there were Cicely Tyson and Diana Sands. You had two. I mean, and beyond that, but I would say that after that, about 10 years from that time, I was in California, and I needed a young black woman to play the part of a fighter husband is killed in the ring, and she then has a confrontation with the white boxer who killed her husband. And it was one thing where she comes around a corner grieving, and she sees this guy. So it's instant acting. I mean, she has to pour it on. It has to, her grief, her anger, all of that has to just surge forward in a tidal wave. And so we brought in 10 people that day. Not that day, but prior to that day. And I'd say 9 were excellent, and 1 was very good. It just, the whole thing had changed. You know, they had gone for training. They had just become a really fine acting pool, incredible acting pool.
Just in a matter of 10 years.
Yeah, in a matter of 10 years. Right.
Another show that you actually directed the pilot for in 1954 was called Justice.
Justice, yes.
And any memories on that?
That's the one that I became the actor. What was the name of the host of that? Gary
Merrill?
Gary Merrill.
Mm-hmm. And that was a David Susskind.
David Susskind production.
And Gordon Duff, right?
Gordon Duff had something to do with it as a producer, but David was the power in the place. I mean, that was his show. And on one occasion, we worked with an actor who went up in his lines on the run-through before the dress, right on the very first line. His name is James Barton. James Barton was quite a prominent figure at that time. He had done a number of big plays on Broadway, and 400 performances, and he was very highly regarded. Crotchety, delightful. What's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, delightful chap who played a role in this thing where he was stopping the building of a superhighway right through his property, and he would not sell them the easement and so forth. So he was standing up for his rights and against corporate America taking over. And so on the run-through before the dress, Millie Natwick was in it with him, and Millie threw her first line, and he said, "Oh, wait a minute, I've got it. What is it? What's the line?" And so he got the line from the guy, and then Millie Natwick threw her next line. He said, "Oh, Millie, that's been cut since the first day." She said, "No, Jim, it hasn't." He says, "Yes, it has. Come here." Oh my God, yeah. Anyway, he couldn't get his act together. So I said, "Jim," came down on the floor from the directing booth, and I said, "Is there a cot in your dressing room?" And, "Oh yeah, yeah." I said, "When you go in, you rest, and it'll be okay." And I went through his part, showing the cameras where they would be going, where the staging is, and so on. We played out the whole scene, and so I said, "How was he?" And I went in to visit with him, and he was feeling better, and said, "Are you up to it?" And he said, "Sure, sure." Letter perfect. He said, "No problem." And so we came out, dress rehearsal starts, Millie Natwick throws her line. Wait a minute, I know it, wait. What is it? And he did a repeat of what he had done before, just not a word he could remember. And so I came down and said, "Jim, go back to the cot," and all of that. And I went through the whole show again. And now when I get to the end, there's 3 or 4 people. David Susskind was in England at the time. They're all looking at me, and I look and say, "Oh, no, man, I'm not going to do it." They said, "Look, we put ringlets in your hair, and we do." And so I said, no. Then they came and said, "It's going to cost us a fortune to use a show from previous, and if you just go on." And I was up in the control room, and I said to my assistant, I said, "Billy, what do you think?" I mean, she said, "Danny, I don't know. And then I hear clunk, 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 clunk. Millie Natwick coming up the stairs, iron stairs, into the control room, and she says, "Dan, please, you've got to play the role, because I'd be scared to death to go on with him." So I did. I went on the air as an actor. I put an earphone in my ear, pretending that was a hearing aid, and so just in case, if I went up in the lines, they fed the line through. And so.
Was that your television debut?
That was my TV debut. Yeah.
How'd you do?
Oh, it was fine. I think everybody was glad. Got a nice review in Time magazine. So.
Very nice.
Yeah. So.
And so how does one direct and act in a live television show?
Well, that's it. I could hear them because I was on this. I could hear them in the control room. Billy, a woman, Billy, was my AD, and she called the shots just the way if I were there.
Wow, amazing. One other big show during that time was Kraft Television Theater.
Mm-hmm.
Anything stands out on that show?
Oh, unless I knew what the episode was or what the story was, I wouldn't. The Kraft was just a name for another Studio One type.
Drama anthology.
Drama anthology.
Right. In '56, you directed a U.S. Steel Hour show called Bang the Drum Slowly. Tell me about that.
That was Paul Newman, played a pitcher in a baseball team. And Albert Salmi was his catcher, and it was out of a novel that had a lot of currency at that time, was highly regarded. Mark Harris was the writer of the novel, and it was about baseball, but it was not about baseball. It transcended that.
What was it about?
The catcher was dying, and he doesn't want to tell anybody, of course, but he finally confesses this information to his pitcher, who then made it his life's work, in effect, to protect that secrecy, so that the guy could play baseball as long as he could. And so it was a study of human relations and of caring and of love on the part of these two kind of unlikely partners, because the catcher was dumb, just a dumb guy with a heart on his sleeve, and the pitcher was sharp, could deal with the front office in a quite wonderful way, and Newman was superlative in it, and so was Al Salmi. Later it was done as a picture, and
was this the first time you worked with Newman?
That was the first time, yes.
Was it clear to you at that time that he had talent as an actor?
Oh boy, yes indeed. In spades, there was no question. No question he would be a movie star.
Really?
Oh, none.
What made him stand out from the other actors?
Well, first of all, he had that kind of assurity, sureness in all his moves and so on. He had a magnificent voice, low, rich register, and there was no question that at that time there was another young person who was burst on the scene in New York and did all kinds of the same kind of shows, and I worked with her on one occasion, and that was Grace Kelly. No question. We all knew that those two would be major stars, and it proved to be the case.
True enough. You know what? I'll change tapes here.